The survival methods of the American Wild West were so ingenious, so brutally efficient, and so completely repulsive, that it's hard to decide what's more impressive: the pioneers' creativity or their ability to eat absolutely anything without making a face. They preserved meat for years without refrigeration. They made bread without commercial yeast, which didn't even exist yet. They manufactured coffee without coffee beans. They treated wounds with spider webs, not out of superstition, but because it worked. And science only figured out why 100 years later. They turned buffalo dung into high-performance cooking fuel. They extracted vitamins from the partially digested intestinal contents of animals that had been eating grass. All of this in a period when anyone could call themselves a doctor. The treatment for cholera included a rectal injection of mercury chloride, and the surgical anesthetic was basically however much whiskey you can handle before passing out. The methods that guaranteed the survival of hundreds of thousands of people in this period have almost completely disappeared from the American collective memory. This script is about them. What actually worked, what worked for reasons nobody understood, and what was simply all there was. Pemmican, the protein bar that lasted years and smelled like an agreement. Before protein bars, energy bites, or any packaged product you buy at the gym, the indigenous peoples of the American plains had invented the perfect survival food: pemmican. The recipe was simple and brutal. Bison, deer, or elk meat was dried in the sun until brittle as a piece of wood. Then it was ground into a coarse powder. That powder was mixed with rendered animal fat, bone marrow tallow, in a 1-to-1 ratio by weight. Sometimes dried berries like cranberries and currants were added. The mixture was pressed into bars that could last 1 to 5 years without refrigeration at room temperature. 5 kilograms of fresh meat produced 1 kilogram of pemmican. It was essentially a portable power battery that fit in your pocket and needed no refrigerator. Arctic explorers took pemmican on expeditions to the North Pole. Inuit used it as a soup base. Cowboys and mountain men traded it like currency. The only problem was the smell. Animal tallow fat at room temperature smells like exactly what it is: animal tallow fat at room temperature. You survived, but you didn't make friends. Hardtack, the bread that laughed at your teeth. Hardtack was a biscuit made from flour, water, and salt, baked until it had the consistency of a ceramic roofing tile. It technically had no expiration date. A piece of hardtack stored in a dry environment could last for years without spoiling, which says a great deal about how little that was nutritious or palatable about it. American Civil War soldiers called it sheet iron crackers and hardtack with maggots. When the little critters eventually found their way inside, the standard consumption technique was to soak in hot coffee or broth. The heat from the dunking had an interesting secondary effect. The larvae inhabiting the biscuit would float to the surface of the liquid, where they could be skimmed off before eating. A National Park Service record documented that soldiers sometimes crushed hardtack with their rifle butt to manage mixing it into stew, the rifle butt, to eat. The man who spent 2 months on the trail eating hardtack and came home without a single tooth was considered an experienced veteran, which was not an exaggeration. Sourdough, the pet that fed you. Commercial active dry yeast was only produced industrially starting in 1943 by the Fleischmann's Company. Before that, in the Wild West, anyone who wanted risen bread needed a sourdough starter, a natural yeast made from flour and water that captures wild yeast from the surrounding air. The starter was basically a living creature. It needed to be fed regularly with more flour and water, kept at a reasonable temperature, and treated with enough care not to die. A cookie, the ranch or wagon train cook, could keep a sourdough starter alive for months or even years. Diaries of the time describe cooks placing the starter container under their blanket on winter nights to keep it warm. Some accounts mention cowboys carrying the sourdough container close to their body during marches in cold weather because body heat was enough to keep it alive. Losing the starter was a tragedy. It meant weeks without bread, biscuits, or flapjacks. It was like losing a coworker, but one that made bread. The sourdough starter was the only pet on the ranch you could eat if you got truly desperate. Buffalo chips, the fuel nobody wanted to mention at dinner. The American plains of the 19th century had a very specific characteristic. Very few trees and immense bison herds. No trees, no firewood. No firewood, no fire. No fire, no hot food. No winter warmth. No boiled water to kill germs. The solution that emerged was as practical as it was unglamorous: burning dried bison dung. Buffalo chips were dried dung patties that burned slowly, produced steady heat, and provided even cooking. Oregon trail wagon trains assigned specific tasks for collection. Children walked alongside the wagons gathering chips and placing them in bags. Women's diaries of the era describe overcoming initial disgust and accepting the task as routine. One witness recorded that buffalo chips burned better than most woods and produced less smoke, which is simultaneously fascinating and disturbing because it means dried bison dung is a superior quality fuel. Your Wild West meal was prepared in an oven fueled by exactly that. Bon appetit. The of cholera that killed between breakfast and lunch. The biggest killer on the Oregon Trail wasn't a bandit, wasn't a predatory animal, wasn't a storm. It was a bacterium called Vibrio cholerae, and the most crucial Wild West survival strategy was simply not contracting cholera, which required not drinking contaminated water, which was exactly the water from every river the wagon trains used to camp beside. Cholera could kill a person within hours. Documents of the era record cases where someone was fine in the morning, in agony by 11, dead by noon. The disease spread through the Platte River in Nebraska and Wyoming, where caravans camped, washed clothes, emptied chamber pots, and drank from the same stretch of river. Nobody understood the mechanism. Germ theory was still being formulated in Europe. Available treatments included opium, calomel, which is highly toxic mercury chloride, cayenne pepper and brandy, rectal injections of sugar of lead with opium and gum arabic, and prayer. Effectiveness varied. Of the estimated 350,000 who attempted the trail, cholera may have killed up to 30,000. It was deadlier than any Wild West gunfighter you've ever heard of. Wild West medicine, anyone could be a doctor. Until the American Civil War, there was no federal law requiring medical training to practice medicine in the United States. Anyone who decided to call themselves a doctor could do so. It's estimated that only about a quarter of doctors practicing in the Wild West held any kind of degree, and even the graduates had attended medical schools that awarded the MD after 1 or 2 years of study. The result was a scenario where surgeons performed amputations with wooden saws without any sterilization, dentists performed extractions using regular blacksmith pliers, and patent medicine salespeople sold elixirs containing varying amounts of alcohol, opium, morphine, cocaine, and herbal mixtures to treat everything from pneumonia to deafness. Opium laudanum was sold freely for colicky babies, adults with headaches, and anyone with any complaint. Medical documents of the era recommend for cholera a rectal injection of a mixture of sugar of lead, opium, and gum arabic. Sugar of lead, rectally, as emergency treatment. The average life expectancy of someone receiving that treatment was probably lower than someone receiving absolutely nothing. Whiskey, the anesthetic, the antiseptic, the tea, and the cure. If there were a single product that summarized Wild West American medicine, it would be whiskey. It was surgical anesthetic. Before an amputation, the patient was given as much whiskey as they could drink until they lost consciousness, or at least the will to fight. It was a wound antiseptic, poured directly onto cuts or punctures to prevent infection. It treated cholera when mixed with red pepper. It relieved toothache. It treated flu when mixed with honey and lemon. It served as an infant sedative for colicky babies, a practice described in multiple women's diaries of the era with no tone of disapproval. It was barter currency, payment currency, and diplomatic currency. Men who had drunk the necessary quantity to survive an amputation surgery generally woke up with 2 problems: the absence of a limb and a historic hangover. An American historian researching frontier medicine concluded that whiskey, while completely inadequate as real surgical anesthesia, probably reduced surgical mortality rates simply because drunk surgeons and drunk patients made more mistakes and accidentally hit fewer arteries. That's my estimate, but it doesn't seem unreasonable. The spiderweb that stopped the blood. Among Wild West American home remedies, some were folkloric and ineffective, and some were folkloric and functionally correct, for reasons nobody understood at the time. Applying spiderweb over cuts to stop bleeding is an example of the second case. It was a documented practice in 19th century popular medicine manuals, in pioneer diaries, and in frontier survival guides. The reason it worked would only be understood decades later. Spider silk is composed primarily of fibrin protein, which has natural coagulating properties when in contact with blood. Modern research has confirmed the substance has real potential as a hemostatic dressing. Pioneers who packed spiderwebs into wounds were unknowingly applying a biologically active and clinically promising bandage. They did it because it was what they had learned and because they had nothing else. Result: accidentally correct. For infections, they applied chewed tobacco to the wound, which probably did more harm than good, but at least smelled different from bison fat. The river crossing, the cause of death. Nobody films. Hollywood loves dramatic Wild West death, gunfight, knife in the back, snake, bandit attack. What Hollywood doesn't film is the real number 2 cause of accidental deaths on the Oregon Trail, being crushed by your own wagon wheel, and the number 1 cause of fatal non-disease accidents, river crossings. In 1850 alone, 37 people drowned trying to cross the Green River in a single season. When flooded rivers capsized a covered wagon, oxen, provisions, and family all went into the current together. Children falling off the sides of moving wagons could be crushed by the wheels before anyone noticed. An 1847 diary recorded, with the spelling of the era, Mr. Harvey's young little boy went to get in the wagon and fell from the tongue. The wheels run over him and mashed his head and kill him. Stone dead, he never moved. That sentence has been preserved in exactly that spelling for nearly 200 years because it is literally impossible to forget. The wheels went over him and mashed his head. That's the real Wild West. No dramatic soundtrack. Axle grease. When the wheel lubricant ran out. Covered wagon wheels needed regular lubrication or friction would destroy the bearings, and the wheel would simply stop turning, leaving the family stranded in the middle of the plains hundreds of kilometers from any help. The standard lubricant was wheel grease, a mixture of animal tallow and other components. When it ran out, which happened frequently, pioneers needed to improvise. The documented solution? Lips dried and cracked in the dry plains air, and the only available remedy was rubbing axle grease on them. Axle grease, the same kind used on the wheels, on lips. Historical documents confirm this practice as routine, not exception. One period writer recorded that lips blistered and split in the dry air, and that the only remedy was to rub axle grease on them. When wheel grease ran out and improvisation was necessary, wolf fat, buffalo fat, or whatever animal fat was available, was used to lubricate both the wheels and the lips. Wagon wheels and pioneer lips literally shared the same beauty product, comfort and mobility in one single multi-purpose item. Gunpowder in the wound, panic sterilization. Wild West medicine had a treatment for gunshot wounds that today looks like it came from a horror movie. Apply gunpowder to the wound and light it on fire. The logic was that the heat of the burn would destroy any infection. It was terrible in terms of pain. It caused additional burns to already damaged tissue. It introduced more foreign material into the wound. But in some cases, paradoxically, it could reduce bacterial infection simply through cauterization. The method worked with the same logic as burning a house to kill a mosquito. Technically effective for the stated purpose, but with devastating side effects. Whiskey was the gentler alternative. Also not an effective antiseptic by modern standards, but alcohol does have real bactericidal properties. Dr. George Goodfellow of Tombstone, Arizona, became famous for being one of the first Western physicians to adopt antiseptic techniques based on regularly cleaning the wound instead of cauterizing it. This was considered revolutionary in 1880. The man gained fame for washing the wound with clean water and not burning it. Those were the standards of the era. Scurvy, that arrived in winter like an old friend. Scurvy is a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. In the American Wild West, especially in winter months and during long crossings where fresh fruits and vegetables were inaccessible, scurvy was a regular visitor. The symptoms were progressive and miserable. Gums would begin to bleed, and teeth would loosen and fall out. The skin would fill with dark spots. Old scars would reopen because the collagen holding them closed had degraded. A person with advanced scurvy looked literally like they were falling apart. The problem was that nobody knew it was caused by vitamin C deficiency because vitamin C, as a scientific concept, wasn't isolated until 1928. In the Wild West, knowing empirically that fresh vegetables and citrus fruits prevented scurvy without knowing why was knowledge passed down through generations. Some remedies worked, taking citric acid dissolved in water, eating raw dandelion, smelling and eating any green vegetable available. Some well-organized wagon trains carried citric acid specifically for this purpose. Others simply prayed and hoped to arrive before their gums fell out. Trail burial, under the wheels for safety. When someone died on the Oregon Trail, grief had a strict deadline dictated by the physics of collective survival. The wagon train couldn't stop indefinitely. Burials were quick, without coffins, without identified headstones in most cases. The reason was twofold. First, there was no time. Second, and more disturbing, identified graves were dug up by wolves who smelled the flesh and unearthed the bodies. The solution developed by pioneers was to bury the dead directly in the middle of the trail, where constant wagon and animal traffic would compact the earth and mask the smell. This means that 300,000 to 400,000 people walked, literally, over tens of thousands of graves across 25 years of trail use. Estimates say there were 20 graves per mile along the entire length of the Oregon Trail, most without markers, many deliberately buried under the path where other wagon trains would pass. The Oregon Trail was a 2,000-kilometer-long graveyard, and people walked over it without knowing, which, incidentally, is a decent metaphor for a lot of things in life. The intestinal content that prevented scurvy. The mountain men, the fur trappers who lived and operated in the Rocky Mountains in the 1820s and 30s, had a diet consisting largely of meat and nothing else. No vegetables, no fruits, no obvious vitamin C sources. And paradoxically, few documented mountain men developed severe scurvy, the reason discovered decades later. They ate boudins, sausages made from the intestines of freshly killed animals, packed with the intestinal contents still present, which included partially digested grasses and vegetation. This content, crude by any modern gastronomic standard, contained vitamins and plant nutrients that prevented deficiency. The mountain men were consuming secondhand vitamin C, extracted from plants the animal had eaten, processed by the animal's digestive system, and then ingested by the human who ate the entrails. It was the most bizarre nutritional supplementation system ever developed. It worked for reasons nobody understood, and it remained in use for decades. Modern nutritional science has a name for this process. I choose not to use it here. Vinegar pie. When there was no fruit, American frontierswomen and pioneering cooks had a relationship with culinary creativity that would make a modern Michelin-starred chef cry, but for the wrong reason. When lemons were absent and apples non-existent in the middle of the plains, they made vinegar pie. The vinegar pie was made with apple cider vinegar, sugar, flour, eggs, and spices, in a ratio calculated to mimic the tartness of citrus fruit or apple well enough that the palate would convince itself it was eating something it wasn't. Documented recipes of the period guarantee the result was tasty and satisfying, which is entirely possible because sugar, butter, flour, and eggs are a pie regardless of what you put in the middle. Other versions included cheap sorrel pie, which used a tart wild plant collected from the field to simulate lemon. The American Wild West pioneer could create ersatz versions of practically any European dessert with ingredients that had nothing to do with the original. It was like making sushi with whatever's in the fridge, but the fridge didn't exist. Bear head cheese. What to do with the animal's head? Head cheese is not cheese at all. It is a cold cut made by boiling the entire head of an animal, whether pig, cow, or bear, in seasoned water until all the meat falls off the bones. That meat is then chopped, seasoned, placed in a mold, and cooled until it sets firm from the natural gelatin of the boiled bones. The result is a slice that resembles a kind of firm pâté. In the American Wild West, head cheese was one of the most efficient techniques for wasting nothing from a slaughtered animal. While the best cuts were consumed fresh or turned into jerky in Pemmican, the head provided head cheese that was preserved by cold or salt and lasted for weeks. Hunters who killed a bear, the biggest protein prize available in American forests, used every last part. Bear head cheese appears in multiple period cookbooks. The tongue went separately, roasted or pickled. The brain went sautéed in butter when there was butter. The heart went roasted. No part was discarded. The Wild West didn't know the concept of throwing food away. It knew very well the concept of going hungry. Sweet potato coffee. And the coffee ran out. Coffee was the number one morale item in American Wild West wagon trains. Pioneer women's diaries record that a morning cup of coffee was the only luxury that maintained sanity on 16-hour days of walking in dust. When the coffee ran out, and sometimes it did, pioneers created substitutes. The most common documented recipe involved sweet potato. Roast, dry, grind, and brew as an infusion in hot water. The result was a dark, mildly sweet, and completely caffeine-free liquid that fooled absolutely nobody but fulfilled the morning ritual of having something hot to drink while the sun rose. Other alternatives included roasted chicory, roasted and ground acorns, and in some cases, dandelion roots. Roasted dandelion root, interestingly, produces a beverage that reasonably resembles coffee in color and bitter flavor, and is still sold today as a caffeine-free coffee substitute in health food stores. The pioneers arrived at this through necessity. The 21st century wellness market arrived at the same product by choice. The circle of life has its ironies. The most important ranch in the Western was the Chuckwagon. The invention of the Chuckwagon by Charles Goodnight in 1866 was as important to Wild West survival as any weapon, law, or railroad. It was a specially adapted wagon, serving simultaneously as mobile kitchen, field pharmacy, tool storage, and supply depot. The cook, called Cookie, was the most important employee of any cattle drive. He woke 2 hours before everyone else, prepared coffee and biscuits, then galloped ahead of the herd to find the next stopping point and start lunch before everyone arrived. Then moved ahead for dinner. A good cookie could influence whether a cowboy chose to work at one ranch over another more than any other factor, including salary. Period dictionaries record that insulting the cookie's food was a serious violation of the cowboy code, subject to serious consequences. The cookie also served as doctor, nurse, emergency dentist, occasional veterinarian, and sometimes clerk. He was the only healthcare, dental care, animal care, culinary, and logistics professional available for hundreds of kilometers. All of that for $30 a month. Rocky Mountain oysters, the delicacy nobody explains on the menu. The Rocky Mountain oyster is an American delicacy that still appears on restaurant menus across the American West with a level of euphemism that approaches the art of strategic communication. It has nothing to do with oysters. It is a bull calf testicle, removed during the animal's castration, cleaned, breaded, and fried. In the Wild West, the logic was simple. You've just performed a procedure on an animal that produced an edible, protein-rich byproduct. Throwing it away would be unthinkable waste. Cowboys ate them during the castration events themselves, prepared right there in the field with whatever was available. Historical documents describe this as an almost festive event during castration seasons, with cooks preparing the pieces directly over the campfire while work continued. Today, Annual Rocky Mountain oyster festivals take place in Colorado, Texas, and other western states, where they are consumed enthusiastically by tourists who often only discover what they are after they've already eaten them. The menu explains they are bull testicles. The Chuckwagon source explained nothing. People simply ate and gave thanks. Ignorance is sometimes the best seasoning. Laudanum, the addictive that was in everything. Laudanum was a mixture of opium dissolved in alcohol, freely available without prescription at pharmacies, general stores, and from traveling vendors in the American Wild West for much of the 19th century. It was prescribed for practically everything: toothache, infant colic, cough, diarrhea, anxiety, insomnia, painful menstruation, and any other symptom that bothered the patient enough to pay for a bottle. The mother giving laudanum to her colicky baby was, unknowingly, administering an opiate to a newborn. The person taking laudanum for a toothache became dependent within weeks. The American Wild West had an opioid dependency epidemic that is rarely mentioned in westerns because it's not dramatic enough for an action scene. By 1880, injectable morphine was also available and frequently used as post-surgical treatment. Civil War soldiers returned with morphine addiction in such numbers that the dependency became informally known as the soldier's disease. The 21st century American opioid crisis has a direct prehistory in the 19th century that prefers not to be told in public. The water test. When there was no way to know. The question of drinking water was the most fundamental and most constantly dangerous survival problem of the American Wild West, and the cruel irony is that there was no reliable way to identify contaminated water by sight. The Platte River in Nebraska, where most wagon trains camped, looked like normal water. It was full of cholera bacteria deposited by the wagon trains that had passed before. Filtration methods of the era were rudimentary. The most documented involved letting water settle in a bucket for an hour, when the heavy sediment sank to the bottom, then mixing a quarter cup of cornmeal into the water to attract suspended particles. After another hour, the water looked cleaner. It wasn't. It just looked that way. Boiling would kill most pathogens and was known as an effective measure, but it required fuel, which was scarce. The 1858 Oregon Trail Guidebook, the National Wagon Road Guide, explicitly recommended not depending on hunting or fishing and planning strict rationing of provisions. On water, it said only, use what is available. That sentence killed tens of thousands of people. The minimum survival inventory. What to take to not die. 19th century emigration guides were survival documents of surgical precision because a miscalculated provision meant dying 300 kilometers from the destination. Captain Randolph Marcy, who wrote The Prairie Traveler in 1859, with 25 years of frontier experience, listed the minimum per person per travel day: 2 kilograms of flour, 680 grams of bacon, 90 grams of sugar, 18 grams of coffee, 18 grams of salt. A family of 4 needed approximately 450 kilograms of food to complete the Oregon Trail. The cost of outfitting a wagon and family for the crossing, including the vehicle, oxen, food, and basic supplies, was something between $800 and $1,200 in 1800s money, the equivalent of 47,000 current dollars. Most families sold everything they owned to finance the journey. If they arrived, great. If they didn't arrive, they no longer had anything to return to. It was literally all or nothing, executed on a continental scale before the invention of the telephone. Son of a bitch stew, the dish, whose name said everything. The American Wild West had a dish whose name is untranslatable in a polite way in any language, officially called son of a gun stew in the family version, but whose field name was considerably less delicate. It was made with parts of a freshly slaughtered young steer that spoiled fastest and therefore needed to be consumed immediately. Heart, liver, pancreas, kidneys, bone marrow, and what period cookbooks delicately called sweetbreads, which are the thymus and pancreas glands. Everything was chopped and cooked together in a cauldron. The dish had a name that openly acknowledged the experience of consuming it. Cowboys who arrived at the end of a work season and received this organ combination on their plate had a reaction recorded in diaries of the era. They ate. There was no alternative. The dish's informal name was the only expression valve available for the feeling generated by the menu. It was nutritious, rich in vitamins and minerals that normal cuts didn't have, and probably far healthier than anything a modern cowboy would find at a roadside fast food restaurant. Progress has its ambiguities. Citric acid at exactly the right moment. Among all the survival methods of the American Wild West, one of the most elegant for its simplicity was the use of citric acid as scurvy prevention in well-organized wagon trains. Documented medical kits of immigrants heading to Oregon and California included calomel pills, opium and morphine, opium laudanum, rum or whiskey, peppermint oil, quinine for malaria, hartshorn for snakebite, and citric acid for scurvy. This kit combined things that worked, things that didn't work, things that caused severe chemical dependency, and things that were actively toxic, all packaged together with equal confidence. Citric acid was the only item in the kit that worked precisely for its stated purpose and caused no collateral damage. It was the most competent employee on a team of questionable professionals. The doctor who prescribed calomel, which is mercury chloride, for cholera while including citric acid to prevent scurvy, was simultaneously treating and poisoning the same patient with different supplies. 19th century medicine was Russian roulette with elaborate labels. The bones as postal system. The Oregon Trail produced one of the most macabre and ingenious communication systems in American history, the Bone Express. As the years advanced and tens of thousands of animals died along the trail, leaving bones and carcasses along the entire length of the route, pioneers began using those bones as bulletin boards. Messages were written on sun-bleached bones, on pieces of clothing, on wooden boards, on any available surface, and left along the trail. A message could warn of a dangerous river ahead, announce the sale of equipment, leave instructions for friends coming behind, or simply record the name and date of a traveler who had passed through. Two lovers, separated by their families, John Johnson and Jane Jones, used the system to exchange messages along the entire Oregon Trail in the mid-19th century. J. G. Bruff's 1849 diary recorded counting 150 dead oxen in a single campsite stretch. It was an animal graveyard that functioned as a pre-digital social network. The 19th century Twitter was literally written on bones. Retroactively, this explains a lot about the nature of social media. Flying flower in the Handcart to Oregon. When imagining the pioneer journey to the American West, the standard image is the covered wagon pulled by oxen. What most people don't know is that many immigrants, especially those who couldn't afford a wagon or oxen, made the 2,000-kilometer crossing pushing handcarts. The Mormons, under instruction from Brigham Young, actively promoted handcart companies, groups of immigrants who carried all their belongings in wooden carts pushed by hand along the entire trail from Missouri to Salt Lake City, Utah. More than 3,000 people completed the journey. This way, between 1856 and 1860, one of the expeditions, the Martin Handcart Company of 1856, departed too late in the season and was caught by an early blizzard in Wyoming's mountains. 215 of the 516 members died of freezing. Survivors described arriving in Salt Lake City with feet so frozen that some toes detached when boots were removed, pushcart halfway across the North American continent. The human capacity for making poor choices on an epic scale has no historical limit. The survival that ended and the comfort that never came for everyone. In 1890, the American census officially declared that the frontier was closed. There was no longer a clear boundary between civilized territories and unmapped lands. The Wild West, as it was, had been absorbed by modernity. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, had collapsed travel time from months to days. The survival methods that defined an era, pemmican, hardtack, buffalo chips, whiskey medicine, trail burial, spiderweb on wounds, sweet potato coffee, were gradually replaced by industrial canned goods, trained physicians, refrigeration, and pharmacies with standardized medications. But the transition was neither simultaneous nor equitable. Families in remote regions of Texas and Wyoming used 18th century preservation techniques well into the first half of the 20th century. Some of the survival recipes documented in this script, pemmican, sourdough, head cheese, willow bark medicine that was homemade aspirin, still exist today, not as necessity, as nostalgia. The difference between survival and hobby is basically having a supermarket nearby.